This is Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and the speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, another edition of the Speaking of Speaking podcast. And today, we've been saying this for almost a year now. We were going to get Matt Soper on the podcast. So today, Matt Soper
Carl
is joining us on the podcast. It only took a year and a bit, Matt, to do this.
You know, stage fright. No, I'm just kidding. Schedules, they get all over the place. But no, it's good to be here, Carl. I appreciate you having me, man.
Well, thanks for joining us. And thanks again for being the voice behind the Speaking of Speaking podcast. I really appreciate that.
I love shouting things into microphones, so it totally works for me.
Which you've been doing for how many years now?
10 years now. I've been doing radio for 10 years.
Okay. It, of course, is a very viable form of public speaking. What would you say the difference is between talking on the radio and talking to a live audience standing on stage or whatever?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because radio is a form of public speaking, but so different in the form of you do not see your audience, right? Like, aside from doing a live broadcast at a bar or something, which doesn't, happen all that often, you never see your audience. So whereas, if I'm gonna host an event, like a charity event or whatever, and I'm like, I'm gonna open up with a joke, I can physically see who likes that joke, who doesn't like that joke. When I open up my radio show, I usually start with some kind of joke of some kind of quip. I have no idea if anybody's laughing. I hope people are laughing. I like to think people are, but for all I know, it's two people and crickets, right? It's very interesting in that sense. So and there's pros and cons to that.
Sure.
The pro being, well, you can just assume everybody thinks you're great, right? Hey, everybody thinks I'm entertaining. No one's saying otherwise.
It's
right?
a misconception, but to the point,
exactly,
yeah, absolutely.
Right. But then the con is it working, right? Is what you're saying actually hitting your audience? You really don't know until you start getting those calls or text messages, but you really have to be confident in what you're doing because there's no reaction coming your way.
And there's ample research, obviously, which will discover in time whether or not you are hitting the marks you want to in this thing called ratings.
Yeah, the quote-unquote ratings.
But ratings in the form of, public speaking, you're live on a stage, you get ratings right away. People clap, people go, yeah, or they do something that is...
There's reaction.
There's reaction. There's that audience engagement where, you say something, the audience reacts right away, and you know that. So if it is that different, how do you uncork all that? How do you go into it, knowing that it may or may not work? What's your formula for doing that?
So for my radio show, I do a show mostly by myself, which adds another layer. I do Tony Orr. He does do news on the show, which is great, but he is in and out. It's not a typical morning show. It's Bob and Doug in the morning, right? Like, it's just me and the callers. So I very much have tried to build a show that is interactive, and it's the way I try to lay things out, discuss things. If I have a topic, it's what do you think? What do you think? It's singularly. The way I view it is I'm talking to one person. I don't view it as I'm talking to 100,000 people or whatever it may be. I try to always phrase things as I'm going one-on-one. And I think that's important in a lot of public speaking things. You really want to try to, whoever's paying attention, again, could be one person in the room, could be 20 people in the room. You want every single one of them to think you're talking to just them. And that's how I try to phrase everything on the radio, right? Or on my show is I'm talking to, I'm at the bar, the guy beside me. That's who I'm doing the show with. It's just, that's it. That's how I look at it. It's me and somebody else on a bar stool. And it's just, let's have a conversation. Hey, if more people come to the bar, great. More people want to jump into the conversation, that's great. But any show I build, anything I do, it's for me and that guy on the bar stool.
So how much of that content or that information that you're sharing, as you're indicating, and it's one-on-one, how much of that do you take off air and then bring it back to air? In other words, how much of your content do you, for example, pump through social media to get engagement back, whether it's through a phone call or whether it's through, Bill and Facebook commented and said?
Yeah, Social media is huge. I mean, you absolutely cannot do this job without social media. It has just become a way of life. You have to be on Facebook. You have to be on Twitter. Now you have to be on Instagram. You have no choice whatsoever. And then you've got Snapchat, this and that. It's important, and it's a way to engage, and it's another way for me to try to pull things out of the audience, right? Where if I just rely on phone calls and that phone doesn't ring, well, I'd be hooped. But now it's like, okay, no. I have a discussion about something I saw at the grocery store. Put it up on Facebook the night before the show. Put it up. And then inevitably there'll be a few comments on Facebook, on Twitter, and you use those as springboards, right? Doug says, oh, I hate when people leave the shopping cart in the middle of the aisle. So selfish. And usually when somebody hears one opinion, it sparks them wanting to give an opinion, right? Everybody's scared to take that leap. But if they see somebody else take that leap, oh, now I'm okay taking the leap, right? So it's a great use of your time. It's a great use of your resources. I would suggest that for anybody in radio or anybody in public speaking at all, right? If you've got an event coming up and you have a Facebook page, which you should, Twitter, whatever, the topic you're going to talk about, put a little teaser up there. Put a little something up there so people can start commenting on it, which can also help you when you'll look and you'll go, oh, Karen thinks this about this. Okay, well, I got to work that into what I'm speaking about now, right? It's a great springboard.
It's amazing how social media, and you hit the nail right on the head, is very important, not just from a promotional standpoint. Hey, this morning I'm talking about, or hey, don't forget we're doing this event. But it's also important to engage and get the comments and get the feedback and get the what do you think of this and bringing it back. And that's true, as you said, with live audience as well. I want to move on and ask you, because you have a lot of experience, not just with radio, but you've also done some play-by-play broadcasting as well. What would you say the difference is when you're engaging that kind of audience?
So that is very different, because radio with public speaking, that's a group of people who have come to see you, and maybe not necessarily see me, with the radio station. They do want to hear the music, but they want to be entertained. They want to be informed. Public speaking, they've come to see to hear about the topic. Sports play-by-play, they're there for the game. That at the end of the day, that is what they're there for. You are an accessory. You're helping them enjoy the game. But when it comes to play-by-play, you can't be above the sport. You just can't, right? Describe it, enhance it. Do not trample on it.
How do you enhance it? I think that's one of the things I wanted to touch on, because in my experience, as a coach and a speaker, and also a broadcaster, by the way, you have to be on your game all the time. You have to be engaging. Are there any different rules of engagement if you're doing play-by-play versus, for example, speaking to an audience and saying, "Hey, here's what I do. Here's my business. Here's how I'm engaging."
Yeah, well, it's very stats driven for sports. It's very talk about the players on the ice. So it's like if you can find a tidbit about their life that somebody maybe can relate to, right? Like, Joe Johnson grew up doing gymnastics in Napanee, Ontario. Somebody might go, "Oh, I have an aunt who lives in Napanee," and boom, all of a sudden, they've got a connection to that, right? So it's little tidbits like that can enhance the game, but it's also staying out of your own way, because sometimes maybe you want to even talk a bit too much, right? Sometimes you think, I got to fill this dead air, whereas in radio it's like, you can't have any dead air. We never had dead air. But for sports, it's okay to let it breathe a little bit. It's okay to let the play speak for itself. The sounds of the stick, the this, the that. It's a lot more patience. It's just little things that sports fans, they know what the game is. They know what they like already. You're not going to change their mind, right? You're not changing a Toronto Maple Leafs fan's mind.
Right.
Yeah. They like the Leafs. True. They like the Leafs. That's not going to nothing is going to change that, right? So don't try to change that. Just give them what they want and add a little bit of flavor here and there when you can.
How important is making sure that you're still bringing the right energy?
Yeah, that is very important, because they don't want you too over the top. They don't want you too mellow. You got to find that right middle ground, right? You're excited. They're excited. It's their favorite sport, but don't go too much, because again, now you're becoming bigger than the game.
Okay.
Right? Don't become bigger than the game. People hate that. They know what they like.
So they don't want, he shoots, he scores.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
But they also don't want, he shoots, he scores.
Yeah, right,
They don't want it too much over the top.
It's not a circus.
Right.
It's not a circus.
Right.
They enjoy the game. Let the game speak for itself. Don't make yourself bigger than the game. And that's what they say about players too, right? Like, oh, you got to have respect on the ice, or you got to have respect on the diamond. Don't be bigger than the game. It goes for the broadcasters as well.
Sure.
They're not there to hear you. You're there as an accessory, so don't be bigger than it. And
you're the tie to the suit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's exactly it. You can enhance it, you can have some fun, but at the end of the day, people talk about the game. They don't talk about the announcer and what he said the next day. Unless he says the wrong thing.
Well, exactly. And then there's...
we get a whole other different conversation.
And then there's a different conversation on social media about, did you hear what the announcer said?
That's a bad thing, right?
Oh, my goodness.
They should never talk about the announcer. If they talk about the announcer, it's because he did something wrong.
It's bad.
They never talk about what he did right.
I've only got you for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, it's taken a year to get you here.
I know.
There's so many things I want to ask you because, I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge, but you also bring a very interesting perspective as a broadcaster, somebody who's been behind the microphone in different ways for your entire career. But I wanted to jump in and ask you about radio versus podcasting because a lot of people look at the podcasting world and they go, oh, you know what, I should start a podcast, but it's almost like being on radio. I'm too nervous. I'm too scared. It's going to be expensive. So what is the difference in your mind? What's the difference and what are the similarities?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting question, right? And it's one that I think scares a lot of people in radio. They want to go, oh, radio's been around forever. Like this podcasting thing's just another trick. It's gonna just go away. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it is here to stay. I think it's very, very popular and for good reason. And I think it's great. There's nothing wrong with liking podcasts and liking radio. Both of them can be highly valuable. I don't think radio is going anywhere because of its familiarity, right? It's in cars. People have it in their kitchens. It's a part of their routine. They drive to work. They drive home. They get ready for work while they're getting dressed on their or putting on their makeup, anything whatsoever. It's familiar to people, right? And it's local. That's a big thing for radio, local. I do a show out of Kingston, Ontario. So I'm trying to do as much things about Kingston because that's what people are going to listen to, their own hometown. If I start talking about Toronto too much, all of a sudden they go, oh, well, I can listen to a podcast, right? I can get that anywhere. So when it's radio, you really need to be local. The good thing about podcasts is the freedom, right? And it can be good and it can be bad. The good of it is we can talk for 20, 25, 30 minutes, right? An hour. Podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast I think goes for 3+ hours, right? And I don't think they ever really stop. So there's that freedom. We can't do that on public radio, right? We got to play commercials.
Well, you shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly, right? You got to do commercials. You got to do songs. There's all this goes into it. So it's good and bad with the freedom of the podcasting. But it's good because you can stop and go with the podcast, right? I listen to there's a podcast I listen to every morning before I start my show because I don't need to listen to it at 5:30 a.m. like public radio, right? I can pick it up at 4:30 a.m., pause it at 4:44 a.m., and pick it back up again at 11:15 a.m., right? That is very nice, that touch and go that you can have with podcasting, and that's why it is going to stick around. Our life, we want it at our fingertips, right? I'm holding my phone constantly. You're holding your phone constantly. Oh, I've got to wait in line at the DMV or the bank. Great. Now I can listen to a bit more of that podcast. Right, just gonna pop
check your Facebook feed or whatever,
whatever it may be, right? So I think it's always going to be around, but I think the two can meld. I think they have similarities, they have enough differences. The two can meld. They don't need to be scared of one another. Neither is going to kill the other one, I don't believe.
So radio continues to evolve, and do you think it's still as relevant today as it was even 20 years ago?
Relevant in different ways. I mean, radio used to be king without a doubt. You had everybody listening to it, right? Because there was no podcasts, and TV was a little bit different. And if you wanted to listen to music, you had to have your Discman or your Walkman, and it probably skipped when you were heading to the bus, right? So hey, you didn't really do that kind of thing. That's true, right? So it isn't king in that sense, but it's still very powerful, and because it is local, and the Fort McMurray fires that happened. What happened? Everybody turned to radio because they could give them on-the-ball information. You can't get that from a podcast, right? They record it on a Tuesday, release it on a Thursday. Something happens, well, they don't record again until Tuesday, right? You're not going to get your on-the-ball news from podcasts. TV is all set up ahead of time. News is at 5:30 p.m.,
right?
But if something happens at 2, Maury is on. What are you going to do, right? They've already planned for Maury, and Jerry Springer's after that. There's nothing they can do. They got to wait till 5:30. Radio, we can cut in right now, right? Oh, Led Zeppelin's playing? Great. Go right after Led Zeppelin. Give us the news. That's what
Something's happened.
Yeah, it's what happened with Fort McMurray. That's what happened with the Calgary floods. Anything, right? Any breaking news, radio can get you right away, and it's that is going to keep it alive forever. Has it evolved? Absolutely. There is a lot more recording happening right now in radio, right? There's maybe a little bit less live in radio. There's maybe a little less bodies, right? Like I started doing an overnight show, right, where I was on it from midnight to 5 a.m. That's how I cut my teeth. It doesn't really happen a lot anymore, right? It's changed in that sense. So is it king? Yes and no, right? It's just different, but not in a bad way, just evolving.
Do you think podcasts are a flash in the pan? I say flash in the pan. They've been around almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But do you think it's one of those things that, like some of the other mediums we've seen over the years, take a hit, such as newspapers, even television to a point? Do you see podcasting as, okay, it's hot right now, but in 5 years it's going to go away?
No, because people are so hungry for information now because of social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Social media is both good and bad. It gives us good information. Sometimes it gives us incorrect information. You don't know what's right. You don't know what's wrong. What are you sharing? Which leads to more podcasts coming out, right? Somebody is a hardcore Republican. Oh, there's all these Republican podcasts. Somebody's a hardcore Democrat. Oh, there's all these Democratic podcasts.
Right.
Someone's a hardcore hockey fan. Oh, there's so many hockey podcasts. People are dying for knowledge. They want it. They want to eat it up more so than ever. It's only going to grow. Are there there's good podcasts, also some really terrible.
Oh yeah, they're
right?
good and bad.
Because there is so much, right?
This is one of the good ones.
Yeah, 100%. But there's just anybody can start one, right? Not everyone can be on the radio because you have to be hired by a program director in that building. But anybody can start a podcast, and that for that reason, I don't think it's going to go away. The fact that they have it now going right to your hand, right? It's not hard. I could download one right now. It is not hard to do. So, no, I don't think it's going away, and that's why I think the two need to continue to coexist and work together, because neither is going to take the other one down, and if they just work together, then they'll be completely fine. I
want to ask you one more question before you go, and it's along the podcast line. And you kind of alluded to it a little bit there in what you were just saying, but what would you say to somebody who is listening to this podcast who's thinking, oh, gosh, I want to start a podcast, but, I'm a little gun shy. What would you say to that person that's on the cusp of just getting started?
First of all, do it. Like that is the biggest thing. Take the leap, because you're never going to know what you have, if people like it, if you like it, until you do it. That is my absolute first advice. Get off your you-know-what and do it. You should, because what's the worst that can happen, Carl? That it's not successful? Is the worst that can happen that 2 people listen to it? That's not so bad, is it?
There's 2 people that heard whatever it is that you just shared with them.
That's just it. Even if nobody hears it, it's not. You're not operating on somebody, right? There's no lives at stake here. The worst thing that'll happen is that you wasted an hour of your life, but you don't even need to look at it like that. You tried something. You gave it a go, right? That's the worst thing that can happen, is that you wasted your own time. What were you going to do with that time anyways? Watch TV? Scroll through Facebook? Do something with that time. That's literally the worst that can happen. What's the best that can happen? 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 people could listen, could agree, and could be engaged. The best that can happen is that you actually have somebody interested in what you have to say. Nobody's going to die because you started a podcast.
Let's hope not.
Well, let's hope not, yeah. But it's not brain surgery, right? You don't have somebody's lives in your hand. You just have your own. It's your own time. Give it a go. Get a microphone, get a computer. And you know what? Here's a great thing, too. You can practice. You don't even have to put it on Facebook or on Twitter.
That's true.
Right?
Yep.
Practice it, record it, send it off to a buddy. Send it off to a couple friends that you trust and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Can you give me some pointers? Send it off to Carl, because let me tell you, Carl can help you with that.
I can help you. Yep.
But, it's practice. You can absolutely practice. It doesn't even need to go on the internet. And even if you put it on the internet, nobody listens. Again, nobody died.
What's the worst that's happened?
What's the worst that can happen? Try, man.
It hasn't affected global warming.
Well, yeah, exactly. Not yet.
I mean?
But that goes for anything in life, right? Give it a try. Seriously, because good things can happen.
My guest has been Matt Soper. This has been fun.
Carl, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for letting me yell in the microphone.
No problem. I appreciate it. If you have a question, you want to fire a question my way for Matt, drop me an email anytime. It's askcarl@carlspeaks.ca. Thanks again, Matt, for being on the podcast. We're going to hear your voice in just a moment. As I say, until next time, it's Carl Richards. Get out there and own the platform.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca. And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.